I am going to begin this class on Mahashweta Devi's story, Nadosh, the Incredible Cow. Now, as you know that in your syllabus it is mentioned as the non-veg cow, which is the title of the collection of stories in which this story is included. But the university does not make it clear. So I am in a dilemma how to refer to this story. Nadosh the Incredible Cow or the non-veg cow. So I have decided to refer to this story by what the university goes, that is the non-veg cow, which you will understand. Well, these stories were written for children and published in the Sandesh magazine, which was edited by Satyajit Ray at that time. And you know that Sandesh published many entertaining stories for children. Mahashweta Devi is known as a writer who wrote for the rights of tribal people. She is an activist and she is more known for her political, social views, and her place in literature owes to her novels, which depict the condition of the tribals in India and how they are oppressed. But here we see another side to Mahashweta Devi, that is children's story. Now, this idea of children's literature is in itself a debated idea, or we may say a debatable idea. That is, whether there is any such thing as children's literature. We have to discuss it or understand it in order to decide how to look at this story. So you know that children's literature, by this term, we designate literature which is primarily supposed to be read by children. But we all know that adults are also avid readers of this literature. And very often, the same stories which provide a kind of innocent entertainment to children have within them a message, sometimes a social or a political criticism, which is understood by the adult reader. In other words, they contain something also for the adult readers. Now, when a critic writes that there is no such thing as children's literature, by that he means that literature which is produced only for the children or by children, such literature do not exist, because the publication process, the task of the editor, the publisher, the printers, and the marketing of the work, and therefore creating a consumer demand for this work, all these are not done by children. They are all controlled and guided by adults. And adults do not do anything unless they have some interest in it. So obviously, writers, publishers, printers, they decide what kind of literature would be offered to the children for their consumption. And since adults are inevitably linked to the process of production of children's writings or children's literature, like most of the authors are adults, so it is inevitable that the writers also have in their minds the fact that adults are also going to read this work. Therefore, often writers do not categorize their work as children's literature, or they offer it both to children and adults. And since so many adult readers would be there, therefore a writer has to think of the adult reader also and accordingly formulate or decide what his approach or his position would be in writing this work. And we have seen that even such apparently innocent piece of writings like nonsense rhymes, Lear, for example, Edward Lear's nonsense rhymes, or fairy tales, Alice in Wonderland, or comic strips, Tintin, and so on. All these have some political social significance or political social message. So these writings contain within them some ideology, that is, some belief in some political system, social system. It could be imperialism, it could be race, it could be any kind of ideology, religion or whatever, with which the work will be impregnated, or you may say that the work will have an impression of that ideology in it. So whether children understand that or not, the work will have a great effect probably on both children and adults. Insofar as it has an effect on children, it has to be borne in mind that children's minds are flexible, malleable, they can be molded easily, impressionable. Therefore, the kind of political belief, the kind of faith in a system which the dominant class wants children to develop, that kind of ideology will be propagated through children's literature, because it is the dominant class which controls what kind of writings will be published, what kind of films will get the censorship, what kind of entertainment or shows will be allowed on the television, what kind of comic strips would be published. In other words, all products of consumption for consumption in the cultural sphere are controlled by the dominating class. And this is what the Marxist critic Theodor Adorno has called culture industry. I am writing it. Theodor Adorno, in his book Culture Industry, suggested that the productions in the field of culture, whether it is literature, film, television, music, these also comprise an important segment of industry. So today we very easily accept this fact. Film industry, music industry, previously there were cassettes, now we have online or digital music and so on. But in whichever format, these are products manufactured by corporate entities for consumption by sections of people, and at a particular price they are sold over the counter. But when Adorno wrote his book, at that time still literature or cultural commodities were not conceived as commodities bought and sold in the market. So Theodor Adorno and Walter Benjamin, these two German critics, Marxist critics, they have analyzed how even in the sphere of culture, class domination has a role in deciding what kinds of culture would be consumed by the people. So with this introduction, we come to this story, and you see that here there is not one story but actually two stories. Now I could not get hold of the book itself. If you want to buy this book, which is a book in translation, the originals are in Bengali, this book is now being sold at $75. So I requested AC to provide me, if possible, with the text, and texts which are circulating privately. I got this text, and here there is the introduction and by Navanita Devsen, and two stories, as you can see, Nado's The Incredible Cow, and then we have Cock and Bull story, or not a Cock and Bull story. Let me see what is the title of the second story. Not a Cock and Bull story. That is the title of the second story. So I am going to talk about both these stories, because since nothing is clearly defined, it is better to read a little more than less. Alright. Now, even though these stories were published from 1976 to 1992 in Sandesh magazine, these stories were, this story particularly, the story of the non-veg cow. The context is 1944. So 1944-45, that is the time of the Second World War, and it is pre-British time. Pre-independence time, British era, when Mahashweta Devi was in her childhood, and her father, Monish Ghotok, was a famous Bengali poet of the Kolbol group. His pseudonym was Jubonashu, and at that time there was not much family planning, and therefore every family would have a large number of children, and Mahashweta Devi also has a large number of sisters and brothers, siblings, and we find a mention of that in this story. So in the 40s, the time was different, people were different, and children had a different childhood. So as you can see that the childhood in the 1940s are different from my childhood, for example, in the 1960s, or your childhood. So childhood also does not remain the same in every period, because there are different developments in technology, in our lifestyle and so on. And Mahashweta Devi describes a family from a Mofassil town. There is a suburban town where his father went to work. And the slow pace of life of that town and the characters presented here, there is a sense of innocence associated with these characters. So Mahashweta presents her father as a man who is impractical, who wants to present himself as a hero to his wife or to his children, but at the same time who deeply loves his wife. And his wife particularly, or Mahashweta's mother here in the story, is represented as an innocent wife who never doubts her husband. So whatever her husband tells her, she takes them for granted to be true. And her father is depicted as often telling lies or boasting before his wife, and his wife never doubts him. So there is an atmosphere, or we may say an aura of innocence. And in this telling of lies by the father, we do not see anything evil. This is rather playful. It represents the boyish nature of her father, who wants to be a hero in the eyes of his wife. So we may say that here in these stories there is a different ethos, and a different ethos have a different ethics. So we do not judge these stories by our present day ethics. We have the character in the second story particularly, Dolly Masi, who is also similarly innocent and tells fictitious stories. So we do not judge these, lies or these fantastic narrations as evil, but we look at them as a kind of a spontaneous expression of one's nature or desire. Well, so you see that Mahashweta tells about the cow and says that her mother developed the desire of keeping a cow, probably from the lady who brought her up, the lady called Moni Masi or Moni Didima, who lives in Devghar with a few cows. Here also we see the depiction of a small town, Devghar, and her cows drink tea in winter and eat rice the whole year through, and in winter they are given coats made from blankets. So you see the extraordinary at the very beginning, cows drinking tea. Even Ma has a cow. None of us has seen it. That is because the cow grazes in Potol Babu's garden, delivers her calves at Menuka's place, and is milked by Punni's mother, who drinks the milk. So even Ma has a cow, and nobody has seen this cow. So in this statement, once again we see this improbabilistic, expression. So if somebody has a cow, people must have seen it. But the cow grazes in somebody else's garden, delivers her calves at another person's place and is milked by another person. So nobody in the family ever takes care of this cow, and then nobody milks her or drinks her milk. Somebody else does it. So in what sense this cow belongs to her mother? So this is not only funny, humorous, but also improbable or improbabilistic, as we will say. So we enter in the region of fantasy with such statements. And her father keeps buying hay, husk and oil cake for this cow. So expenditure is made for this cow. So her father is always depicted as making huge expenditure without any complaint. And all of these are mostly useless, or we may say foolish investment. But we would not use the word foolish, because here Mosheta wants her father to appear as a person who is more interested in keeping his wife happy by investing on a cow which does not offer any benefit to the family than thinking about the monetary consideration. So he does not think in terms of profit and loss, and therefore he is an affable character. So I like the word here, affable. That is a person who you like. Then towards the end of 1944 or beginning of 45, Baba was transferred to that Mofassil town. I still wonder whether Baba should ever have gone to such a tranquil place. A Mofassil town is by definition different from the city, say Calcutta, and Mosheta herself was in Shantiniketan, and therefore we may say that she and her siblings, her brothers and sisters, they all had a childhood spent in small towns or in the midst of nature. So her brothers and sisters finished mangoes and lychees growing on trees leased to fruit vendors. So the gardens were leased out to fruit vendors, but the daughters and sons of her father, or her siblings, they would eat them, and therefore her father would end up in paying compensation to the vendors. He would often push off early in the morning to the station on a fishing trip. At the station he would buy the biggest fish available, plant 20 to 25 new hooks in it and bring it home. As soon as he entered, he would say, "The moment I cast my rod." So her father is depicted as a person who loved telling stories, and he told his wife the story how he caught this big fish. But he actually didn't catch it, he bought it from the market and put so many hooks. Now, in order to catch a fish, one hook is sufficient. So here we see the use of exaggeration, hyperbole, which is appropriate because it is a story that is fantastic, or the element of fantasy is important here, and we do not blame her father for not being truthful, because such lies are appropriate in stories. And then the description of the two chaprasis, and the younger brother, the two chaprasis were two brothers, and the younger brother supplied them milk. Ma didn't like his milk. Now, so when Ma was thinking of discontinuing buying milk from the younger chaprasi, that man appeared to be very clever, and instead of selling milk, he decided to sell Ma a cow. Baba and Ma had different groups of advisory panels. Baba's advisory panel consisted of neither my mother nor any of us, but his office gardener, a certain rickshaw puller and a mango vendor. So you see the humor in the situation, that family members were not consulted for any important decision, but characters like chaprasi, gardener, rickshaw puller, they become the advisors, or their opinions are considered valuable by the father. And her mother did not mind that she was not consulted for any decision by her husband. On the other hand, mother had a different group of advisors, and therefore there were two parallel gangs who competed with each other, trying to influence the father or the mother. When Baba built his house, it was on the advice of the mason and Jotin, the cowherd. No wonder the house has 6 rooms, 8 doors to enter and leave through, innumerable other doors and windows, and a water tank large enough for a 10-story building. So you can imagine that what kind of a house a cowherd and the mason would plan. So it unnecessarily became a very large house with a great numbers of doors and windows and a very big water tank. Ma's advisors were the household help Satyanarayan the cook, Menoka and Naran. They decided what clothes to buy from whom and so on. These two gangs were sworn rivals. They were filled with tremendous mutual distrust and so on. So this gives us the context why her father or her mother often took wrong decisions, wrong from the worldly point of view, but they did not mind that they were guided by illiterate people or people who are conventionally considered as unimportant. But one thing we see here, that Mohashweta depicts life in a Mufassil town in the 1940s, when class difference was not so important in their consciousness, and therefore her father could easily accept such people as his guide. Now, these servants or household, employees, they would often have the bad habits or addictions, sometimes of drinking, sometimes of other addictions. And here this man Naran, who was Ma's advisor, he could not be trusted because he had the addiction of marijuana or ganja. And here we have a humorous story that Naran was asked to buy a cow, but he, instead of coming with a cow, he came home with a white bull, which means that probably he, wasted the money on his addiction and then caught hold of a bull on the street, which is of no use, and brought that home. Trouble cropped up on the way home because Naran had the habit of sitting down now and then to smoke ganja. As it happened, Naran had bought a black she-calf, but as Ma waited to ceremonially receive the calf by putting water on her boobs and a mark of vermilion on her forehead, Naran was seen returning with a huge white bull. So, this story makes it clear that the servants, they often took advantage of the forgiving nature of their masters. So, however, such a person cannot be trusted. So this time, Naran was not consulted by Ma, and Ma bought this cow from the chaprasi, younger chaprasi. And then Naran felt slighted, and so he became or grew closer to Baba. So Narayan and Baba together formed a group of critics of Ma's actions. Though Baba didn't openly criticize Ma, but that he listened to Narayan makes it clear that both of them were critical, both of them smiled obliquely. So Ma was suspicious and asked, "Why did you smile? Narayan, isn't it a good cow?" "Why not?" was Narayan's non-committal reply. So he remained non-committal or diplomatic, and he didn't openly criticize Ma for buying this cow. But obviously both Narayan and father, Baba, they did not like the fact that this cow was purchased. And Baba was the only person who through his window watched Nados grow from a calf into a full-grown cow. He knew everything, but he didn't say a word. So this is very cryptic. He knew everything. What did he know? What is the secret? So probably this calf called Nados, probably the strange ways or the strange behavior of the calf was known to Baba because he could watch her, but he kept his mouth shut. He didn't tell Ma anything. The cow came home. None of you could ever have seen such an ugly cow, a bloated belly, all four legs thin, disjointed and splayed outwards, a stiff tail. Her eyes had a fierce gleam. In other words, the cow was probably sick or old, whatever. It was not a cow worth buying. It was not a cow that would, produce a lot of milk. So it was it was an investment that would lead to nothing. But its strange behavior is the cause of many humorous situations. Then the cow was received ceremonially. The chaprasi was presented with new clothes. He went to the pond for a bath, wore the new dhoti and spread it on the grass. At once Nados chewed up half the dhoti, tore the rest to the shreds, and then shoved the younger chaprasi back into the pond as often as it. So it is a humorous situation. The chaprasi's new cloth or dhoti was eaten by the cow, and she repeatedly pushed the man into the pond, which was interpreted by Ma that she is upset because her owner sold her off, her parents sold her off. And then father made a very cryptic comment. Father looked apprehensive. He said to his office gardener, "What your mistress has just done will have far-reaching consequences." So the office gardener is the confidant of the father, and he told him that this action of Ma will have far-reaching consequences. So the reader would be eagerly waiting, and there will be this suspense about the consequences of buying this cow. What are the consequences? But even Baba hadn't anticipated how far-reaching are these consequences. And humorously, Mahashata writes that it is not possible to write a complete biography of Nados. If Nados herself had written one, it might have sufficed. So the life of the cow is so strange and full that it is difficult to write a biography. So nobody ever thought of writing a biography of a cow. But Mahashata apparently takes the cow very seriously, and that is an incongruity leading to humor. Not only that, she says that the cow could have written one. And she extends this joke by saying that why the cow could write, because it had eaten all the books. The school, Nados had eaten up the school textbooks for every single class. So the brothers and sisters, they had textbooks, and Nados had chewed up all the textbooks, but unfortunately she never chewed a pen. So Mahashweta Devi makes the funny comment that she could not write her biography because she had a distaste for pen and ink. And this, we may say, is an implied critique of the education system, where children are made to mark textbooks, and the act of the cow swallowing the textbooks is similar to the children mugging the textbooks and then regurgitating them in the examination papers. So, without making any benefit or without properly learning anything of them. Then she had a real passion for the younger brother Tantu's books. My second sister Mitul and fourth sister Budi were raving lunatics as kids. She was carefully selective about their books. So this is another humorous comment. Two of the siblings are described by Mahashweta as raving lunatics. That is, they were very mad in their childhood, and the cow avoided eating their books, probably because it was afraid of getting mad if it ate the books of these children. So she was selective. My youngest sister Shari and third sister Konchi had both their books and their frocks chewed up by Nados, but she never ate anything more than a singlet and a few neckties of Babar. So singlet means an undergarment or a vest for men. She had strong opinions about color and would eat anything in blue. So you see, we are in the realm of fantasy. That a cow would have any opinion about color is very absurd. But Mahashweta writes that she loved the color blue and ate any cloth of blue color, and that is why Baba's clothes, white clothes, were never dipped into indigo. The custom of not using Nil to whiten my father's singlets prevails to this day. So after saying this, something else, Baba's comment. Baba used to say, this is the quickest way to study. Look with what determination she is eating up the books. So this is of course a humorous comment, but it is also a kind of implied criticism, as I said, of providing useless education to children who has to mug or memorize books without utilizing them or deriving any knowledge from them. Then how the cow got into the habit of eating fish. So Mahashweta does not make this story entirely fantastic, but fact and fiction are mixed together. So we have a reasonable ground or explanation why the cow took to eating fish. Actually, Ma and I are responsible for her turning non-vegetarian. Once the maid who washed the dishes was absent, so we would eat off banana leaves and throw them out afterwards. Nados developed her taste for non-vegetarian food from eating these banana leaves coated with bits and pieces of hilsa fish. Ma tried to explain to her that cows didn't eat fish. So imagine trying to explain something to a cow. So obviously the cow will not hear any reason. So Nados became addicted to the taste of fish by eating those banana leaves. Then one day she kicked her earthen bowl for hay, husk and oil cake to pieces. She snorted furiously with anger, then barged straight into the kitchen and ate up the few hilsa pieces which had been fried for dinner. Thus, the cow turned completely non-vegetarian, and breaking of the container, the bowl for her food, hay, husk and oil cake. The cow refused to eat all these and went straight to the kitchen and ate the pieces of hilsa. Ma started storing fish and meat up in the loft, not for fear of cats, but because of Nadosh. Before that, she ate up all the big fish, small fish, lobsters, prawns, crabs, meat, everything. However, she loved chicken and hilsa best. Naturally, along with fish and meat, she was bound to crave onions and garlic too. Nadosh raided the vegetable basket for these items and ate them up. So here we see Mahashweta describes the cow as becoming a staunch non-vegetarian. And since non-vegetarian people also like onion and garlic, so the cow is described to hunt for them and eat them. So we see here not just fantasy, but an attempt to make this fantasy look real. Then the rickshaw puller Nandan told Baba that Nadosh was possibly under the spell of some evil spirit. So people tried to explain or tried to interpret how the cow became non-vegetarian, and the superstitious Nandan thought that it had come under an evil spell. And the cow was becoming very strong, eating all this non-veg food. And then she was kept locked up. But from there she escaped. And this is described in a very funny way. So our cowshed had a low door with an opening above it. Nadosh leaped through that gap just like the cheetah of Rudraprayag that Jim Corbett wrote about. So imagine a cow leaping like a cheetah. So this is not only fantasy, unreal, but it also creates a lot of humor or laughter. As soon as she was out, she would stomp her way to the kitchen. The kitchen was on the first floor and she would go all the way up. If the menu happened to be vegetarian, Nadosh would be deeply offended. She would glare at us with bloodshot eyes. Now whether to take that as real or as fantasy, it is difficult to imagine, and it is also futile to try to understand whether these descriptions are real or fantastic, because as children's literature, fantasy is a very important element in such kind of writing, and here one does not raise these questions of verisimilitude or reality. Early in the morning she would stand on the bank of the Ganga. Every time the Bihari constables tried to climb out after their morning dip in the river, she would push them back in. Fighting the British police was no joke. Nadosh is possibly the only cow in British ruled India to have police cases lodged against her. This phase continued for quite some time. Now this is another humorous depiction suggesting that the cow was anti-British because she pushed the constables, police constables in the river, and saying that there were police cases lodged against her, which we can all assume to be not true, but exaggerations for the sake of the story. When we look at the comments by Vargas Llosa. I have given you that material. Then you will see that Llosa also talks about the importance of lies or fiction in stories. Here, therefore, we see an awareness against the British domination of India. We may say that here is a reflection of independence movement against the British, but humorously the protagonist here is a cow. So that is possible only in fantasy. But what is the reader supposed to read here or to interpret here? Obviously, this ideology of fighting against the British is implied through this depiction. Even though the depiction may be humorous, may be funny and fantastic, not real, even then we have a depiction of a desire for independence against foreign colonial domination. After 3/4 of life lived in such a tempestuous manner, one sweet morning Nathos stormed back home. Ma's ecstasy knew no bounds. My Nathos has come home, she is reformed, she has finally remembered that she is a domestic cow. Now, you see, Nathos is depicted as just not being domestic, and she does not obey the orders of people, and she is whimsical. She often, behaves badly by pushing people into water or so, and therefore we may say that this any desire of keeping a person under domination, under control, under domesticity, that idea is challenged here. When we see that even a cow does not want to remain domestic, we may think of it as a reflection that would a girl would like to always be under the control of people, under the control of her parents? Would she always like to lead a domestic life? In a generalized sense, the desire to have independence, the desire to do whatever one likes, a reflection of that, possibility to follow one's own desires can be seen in the depiction of the strange actions of the cow. And even though these are actions of a cow, such desires in a person also are natural. That is, the desire to be free, to not to be domestic, to not to be under somebody's control. So we may read this story as depiction of something which is not there in reality, and that is why it is fantasy. Not only it is a fantasy that a cow behaves in this manner, that is of course fantasy, but it is also a fantasy to imagine that people could ever be completely free, could not be under domination, could not be under subjugation. Then a description how she went to the terrace. So a cow climbing the stairs and going all the way up to the terrace is the proverbial, impossibility or fantasy. Because in Bengali there is a proverb that in a story a cow can climb a tree. And with that idea, Mahashata began this story, that cock and bull stories. Now, cock and bull story is an English phrase or an English translation, but the impossible story or fantasy is in Bengali idiom. In a story, a cow can climb a tree, as if that very Bengali proverb is given flesh and blood in this story, where the cow is depicted as climbing stairs. Why she climbed the stairs? She didn't want the hay in the cow shed, she preferred the hay on the terrace. Anish and Abu explained with the usual scientific approach of boys, Nadosh is like a scientist. She wants to get to the root of everything. She doesn't like the hay in her shed, she wants to get to its source. So this is a humorous, statement to imagine that a cow is a scientist or like a scientist and wants to go to the root of things. And here there is also a kind of, implied criticism of the stereotypical idea that only boys have scientific attitude. So Mahashweta depicts the boys as having the usual scientific approach of boys. So this is a stereotypical idea which is laughed at here by this strange explanation by the boys. Then we have the story of Nadosh getting drunk or intoxicated by drinking up all the date palm juice and walking with a noticeable swagger. She went all the way up to the terrace and was chewing hay. When she suddenly noticed the full moon, immediately she planted herself at the absolute edge of that terrace. This humorous situation, why should a cow be attracted by the full moon? A cow does not have any aesthetic sense, but here apparently Nadosh has, and she stands at the very edge of the terrace and people are afraid that she might fall. Not only that, further impossibility and further humorous occasion is created by depicting the next door uncle who opens his windows and looks at the moon to appreciate its view. Now you see, the gentleman next door opened his window, he only opened his window one day in a month to gaze at the full moon. Now we cannot accept this as a statement of truth. This is also an improbable statement. Why should any gentleman open the window only once in a month, and that too to look at a moon? So undoubtedly this is also part of the fantasy in the story, and the gentleman next door is not a real flesh and blood character, but we may say a cartoon or a cartoonish character sketched by the author who appreciates the moon once a year, once in a month. And then when he opens his window, he sees that the view of the moon is blocked by the cow's face. The cow is even tottering a little. What the hell is this? All I can see is the silhouette of a cow. So this funny situation is, we may say, is an extreme exaggeration where everything is impossible, as in the world of Edward Lear, as in the nonsense world. There is no sense. We cannot, or even should not, try to explain it rationally or try to find any symbolism or anything in this. This is pure fantasy. Nadosh is depicted as being afraid of seats of a jeep. Now that is also very improbable. Why should a cow be afraid of the seat of a jeep? It is not a stick or something, just a seat. But that is what frightened the cow. Nadosh would get terribly scared and fall flat on the ground with her legs spread out. And then we have the funny story of the local vet who comes to look at the cow, and Nadosh charges him, and the man scrambled up the pillar clinging on for life and wailing aloud. Nados kept boring his backside. What a scandal. So there is no tragedy here, but it is completely funny and humorous. Nados did not allow the vet to look at her, and therefore she could not be treated. Mosheta ends this story with the statement, even now I often think of Nados, it is impossible to forget her. So the reader is influenced by this last statement. Of course, it is an unforgettable cow, or we may say even the character of a cow, sketched by the author, because the cow seems to have a character on her own right. She has her tastes, she has her desires, and she has her behavior, her actions. So the protagonist of the story is the cow, basically, and therefore we may say that the author manages to create this humorous situation where the cow is the central protagonist. Finish the first story. Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
All right. So I continue with the next story. The title of this is not a cock and bull story, which is a negation of the idea of fantasy. So what is the opposite of fantasy? Realism. So here the author makes a claim that her story is not fantasy, but it is real, which makes this story not more credible to the reader, but acceptable, because our prioritization of the real over fantasy is something that cannot strictly be rationalized. So the author is exploiting this weakness of the reader. The author knows that if the reader is offered something as real and not cock and bull story, then it would be more acceptable. So this is something that we have seen to be a feature of novels from its beginning in the 18th century. So all novels were claimed by the author to be the true story of somebody. That is, the authors always denied the fictionality of their novels, and here Mosheta denies the fantasy nature or fantastic nature of her story, claiming it not a cock and bull story. So the title itself has some kind of a play on ambiguity, because the reader knows that it is a cock and bull story, that it belongs to children's literature, that it belongs in the realm of fantasy, but the title provokes the reader by suggesting that it is not a cock and bull story, and thereby diluting the distinction between the realms of fantasy and realism. So the author here says that the editor wants a cock and bull story, but in our family, for who was the one who had endless stock of such stories? First I have to find out in whose charge he left them. So the siblings, brothers, sisters, and the characters in the story depicted by Mosheta, they all seem to be real and convincing characters. And one of them is in charge of cock and bull stories, as the author claims. My problem is that even if I narrate family anecdotes, they invariably sound like cock and bull stories. So, family anecdotes, stories about one's own family, Is there an autobiographical element in the story or in these stories by Mohashshata? Perhaps yes. But Mohashshata problematizes the nature of autobiography by suggesting that her family members were so strange, or their behavior and actions were so strange, that even if she depicts truthfully their actions, then they become unbelievable or cock and bull stories. And the best example of that is Nadosh. Would anyone ever have believed that Nadosh was a real cow? So this is a statement which provokes the reader, because no reader ever believes Nadosh to be a real cow. But Mohashshata provokes the reader and thereby suggests that the distinction between the realm of reality and that of fantasy is not as clear-cut as we want to believe. Baba was also capable of being a great talker if and when he wanted, but one of my paternal aunts, whom we call Dolly Ma, though totally crazy as far as work goes, is the veritable queen of stories. Now Mohashshata describes this character Dolly Ma, who used to tell impossible stories or behave in a strange way. Now she was also a painter and sculptor. So you may imagine that when she was painting and sculpting, then she was very serious. She is a different person altogether. But when she is telling stories, then she cannot be taken seriously, because she loved telling cock and bull stories. What a relief that none of her sons and daughters is as crazy as she is. Dolly Ma has really driven our solemn and serious uncle up the wall. So Mohashshata humorously suggests that the family members of Dolly Ma, her husband and her sons, they were all unlike her. So do we see here a distinction between a person who is creative and imaginative and therefore loves to tell cock and bull stories, and people who were serious, pragmatic, realistic, but they lack imagination. Then we have the story of Dolly Ma buying 26,000 cow dung cakes. So apparently the seller, the girl who sold these cow dung cakes, convinced her that they are very cheap and told her that she was selling her 26,000 cakes. But when Mohashshata says that when she counted, or she tried to count the cow dung cakes, she found that there could not be more than 1,500. So I sat down to count. I calculated that there were about 1,500. The cow dung girl had simply taken Dolly Ma for a ride. So Dolly Ma was cheated, and she had to pay the price of 26,000. But is this a story about cheating? Most probably not. Because how Dolly Ma lost her money is never the important question here. The whole issue here is about believing in something fantastic. So Dolly Ma was happy that the cakes were sold so cheap. And what was the exact number of the cakes sold or purchased, 1,500 or 26,000, that numerical difference was never important to her. So we may say that through the figures of Dolly Ma, or a little later, Mohashshata's father is described as buying 400 cauliflowers and 22 mounds of rice. So whether these people are cheated by others, whether they are stupid, foolish, that is never the issue in this question. The issue is that can there be such people who are so innocent or who do not care about monetary loss but live in a world of trust and innocence. So we may say that provides a big contrast to our everyday world, the world of reality, and it is in the realm of fiction, it is in the realm of this story that a contrasting realm of trust and innocence can be juxtaposed to that of everyday pragmatic realistic life. So this was an example of Dollima's work. Now let me give an example of her storytelling. So Dollima was a storyteller, and I will tell you about the idea of the storyteller based on Vargas Llosa and Walter Benjamin a little later. First let us look at this. So Dollima tells the story of a picnic where they were cooking venison, that is deer flesh. 2.5 months of venison were to be cooked. Now this is an enormous amount, and people were incredulous and they asked, why 2.5 months? How many people were there? Oh come on, it just happened that the deer was a large one. So the realistic details are very unimportant in a story. So how many people were supposed to eat this amount of flesh or meat? That exact number of people is never important. Or whether a deer can produce 2.5 months of meat, that question is also never raised. So we are in the realm of fantasy, and we just have to imagine that the deer was a large one. Had someone shot it? Something like that. So how the deer died? That is again a practical question which has no relevance in Dollima's story. So she avoids that question, something like that. Anyway, it was discovered that we had forgotten to bring any garlic. We had hired the Raja's chef to do the cooking. We were all wondering what to do about the garlic. The chef grinned and said, don't worry. And then he did something miraculous. He had a box with him inside which there was just one clove of royal garlic wrapped in a piece of cloth. He used no onions, nothing. In fact, he cooked a savory dish of Shahi Korma with the 2.5 months of venison and just that one clove of garlic. So you can see that this is something improbable, and it belongs in the realm of fantasy. So it is never possible to cook such a huge amount of meat with only one clove of garlic, however much royal that garlic may be. So Mahashweta is weaving fiction here, but she wants the reader, or probably the children, to accept this as fact. In other words, to provoke their imagination, to trigger their imagination. And what is not possible in the world of reality is possible in the world of imagination or in the world of fantasy. So this story of Dollima of cooking 22 months of venison with one single clove of garlic is a great example of use of fantasy, and how all the questions, all the realistic questions are waved off or completely disregarded in this narration. That indicates that this is a story that belongs to the realm of fantasy, and we would be asking wrong questions if we try to judge or criticize this story, interpret this story with the help of realistic assumptions. Then the story of Baba's marketing, buying heaps of vegetables and loads of food. So Ma had, so every day Baba would buy a lot of meat, fish, vegetables and tell Ma that it all cost just $5. And Ma of course believed him. And then one day he sent Fargu to the market with a fiver and he brought a small amount of fish and some potatoes. Ma lost her temper. Your Baba does all the marketing daily with just 5 rupees and you got only this measly amount. This is the first time that the marketing has been done with $5, Ma, replied Fargu grimly. So how do we interpret this? Do we criticize Baba for being a liar, lying to Ma every day? But this lie is not vicious. This lie is, we may say, full of charm, full of innocence, the innocent desire to impress one's wife. So underneath this lie lies the childish, boyish desire of the husband to please his wife. And this also indicates the great love, because the wife also always believed in her husband's words. So it indicates the great love between wife and husband. Then once Ma was going away for a month to tour southern India, only Baba and Budi were at home, because the others, they were probably in hostel, like as Mahashweta was in Shantiniketan. So the day after Ma left, the neighborhood was in an uproar. One rickshaw after another was drawing up at our house, each loaded with cauliflowers. Then came rickshaws full of rice. On the last rickshaw came Baba, looking extremely grave and depressed. So a procession of rickshaws, which is very humorous. And on the last rickshaw, Baba sat looking very depressed. Why was he depressed? Because his wife was not at home. So it indicates his great love for his wife. And Budi was very surprised to see so many rickshaws coming and asked in faint tones, "What is all this for, Baba?" Baba responded with a special pathetic and sad smile, "Haven't you understood, my girl? No, Baba. When your mother is not here, the Lakshmi of the house is missing. And if the Lakshmi is gone, then there is no question of going to the market every day. That is why I have brought 400 cauliflowers and 22 mounds of rice. It will have to last a month. We will eat it." So nothing can be more ridiculous than this argument. So it indicates Baba's great love for Ma. But when the Lakshmi is not in the house, one still has to go to the market. So this argument is not valid. But it only indicates how dejected Baba is because of his wife's absence. And the impracticality of buying so many cauliflowers together, because they cannot be preserved for a month. And therefore they had to be given away to people. Only Budi knows what she did with those 400 cauliflowers. Even free distribution in the neighborhood failed to exhaust stocks. The cows got fed up with eating them. And the very next day Baba started writing to Ma, "When are you coming back? I have made a rose garden just for you. The roses are all in full bloom." So we just have to, overlook the attempt to give any rational explanation. So Mahashweta here kind of gives an explanation that the cauliflowers were given away to neighbors and to the cows and so on. But these explanations are strictly not necessary, even though it is an attempt to make the story convincing. One is never convinced that any person can be so foolish, even if he is in love with his wife, as to buy so many cauliflowers at a go. So we accept the story as not real, as fantastic, and leave it at that. The explanation is strictly not necessary. But then the cows Then the next day Baba tells another lie to his wife when he writes that he has created a rose garden for her and the roses are in full bloom. And humorously Moksha depicts that there was no such garden because, however, the garden was quite barren. However, the news of Baba's rose garden had spread far and wide. How could this news spread? Because he must have told people, other people, that he has made a rose garden for his wife. And just before mother would come, Baba employed a lot of people and went off to Keshtonagar and bought whole tubs of rose plants in full bloom, which were then buried in the garden. On her return, Ma was delighted with Baba's rose garden. So, what is the import of this story? Baba was really a lot stranger than even the strangest of fictions. So let us assume that even part of this is real, because fiction is also created around fact, and Mahashita here is mixing fact and fiction. So let us assume that there are some autobiographical elements in it. But then what is the import? What is the significance? The significance is perhaps to establish that truth is stranger than fiction. That in reality we cannot define a person, and even though his behavior may appear to be strange, but such strange things often may be found in reality. That is, a person may have strange behavior or strange attitude. So a person becomes the material of a story. But then do we believe this story fully? That is, Mahashita's father was really like that? Of course we do not, because then it would not have been a story. So it is fictional, and by creating or mixing fact and fiction, Mahashita produces this story. So the idea of storytelling is very important. Mahashita is also telling a story, and no storyteller is to be believed in full. Then there is only one more story of her brother who lived in Darjeeling, bought from a man a highly pedigreed puppy of the mountain Alsatian breed, and it was taken back to Calcutta, and then it appeared that the puppy would never bark, and it grew up. It never barked, and everybody thought that it was depressed or sad. But then one day, when there was the full moon, by looking at the moon, it started howling. And then it was discovered that it was a mountain fox and not a mountain Alsatian. The mountain Alsatian was howling like a fox as it stared at the moon through a window. The gentleman had actually bought a mountain fox. So this is just in the same vein. Her brother is also depicted being as foolish as her father, and being cheated by a person who sold him a fox for a puppy. But the point here again is not that of deception or of foolishness. The point here is of accommodating the incredulous, accommodating the fantastic in the midst of reality. Can a person really be so foolish? That is never the question to be asked. The question is, such strange things, can they happen? And the answer is never definite. Perhaps they can happen, perhaps they cannot, but they are quite good in a story. So this is the idea of storytelling, that in a story a lot of lie, a lot of fiction would be there. Otherwise, it would not be a good story. And now we'll look at the quotations given to you. Alright, so the first quotation, this is from, all the quotations are from Jack Zive's book, Sticks and Stones. The first quotation, the value of the particular book or story was contingent on the teacher's pedagogical and ideological, educational and social practices. Indeed, numerous studies about the racist, imperialist and sexist contents and ideologies in books intended for the young and in reading and teaching practices reveal how the books as commodities had a particular acculturative value for the dominant classes of Western societies throughout the early part of the 20th century. So here the critique talks about the use of children's literature as means of indoctrinating children. Acculturative value means that the values of the dominant classes were inculcated in the children by such books which contained racist, imperialist and sexist contents. Whether they had or can have the intended effect is a matter of dispute, but books for the young, perhaps even more than books intended for older readers, have always been used as weapons or instruments to train or cultivate taste, to help children to see distinctions and distinguish themselves. So, see distinctions of what? Class distinctions. So here the author is using the Marxist explanation by Theodor Adorno of the culture industry, that is the products churned out by the industry of literature, film and other kinds of cultural expression. These products always were used as instruments for acculturating the children or the readers. So, the value of these specific uses has been examined, appreciated and appropriated, especially by teachers in group settings. But there are also a multitude of private and individual uses that young readers have made of books that involve identification with the characters, empathy with their situation, regeneration of hope, recreation of the self, learning about the world and so on. So books, when they are taught by teachers in class or when they are part of any syllabus, in college, wherever. So the teachers, they have examined, appreciated and appropriated the values contained in these books. And the suggestion has already been made that these values are often the values of a particular dominant class. But young readers or children, they also make private and individual use of the books. That is when somebody is reading a story book, not part of the school syllabus, but for his or her own entertainment. Then children tend to identify themselves with the characters, empathize with their situation, and the regeneration of hope, recreation of self, and learning about the world. So all these effects become effects can be seen on children when they read literature or when they read books. I come to the idea of the storyteller. Mario Vargas Llosa, who is a Peruvian writer, has a novel called The Storyteller. And Llosa writes, talking the way a storyteller talks means being able to feel and live in the very heart of that culture, means having penetrated its essence, reached the marrow of its history and mythology. Vargas Llosa here is talking about the Indians, Indians in America, those tribals in America, who among them there were storytellers, and they would roam from one place to another telling stories. And this tribe, Machiguenga, is an ancient tribe, and there were many storytellers among them. Now their stories would contain the essence of their culture, the marrow of history, mythology, given by its taboos, images, ancestral desires and terrors. It means being, in the most profound way possible, a rooted Machiguenga, one of that ancient lineage who roamed the forests of my country, and bringing and bearing away those tales, lies, fictions, gossip and jokes. So you see that tales, lies, fiction, gossip, all these are things which a storyteller must make use of. So the tribal storyteller would use all the tales, lies, fictions, gossip and jokes of a community. And it is these tales which make a community. The people may be scattered, but the stories make them a community, keeping alive among them the feeling of oneness, of constituting something fraternal and solid. So what is the point made by Llosa here? That storytellers make possible a community to live as one community, even though individuals may be scattered. So the tribals, the Indians, their ways of life were disrupted by the European colonization of America, and they became scattered. But it is their stories, their myths, their fiction, their gossip, all those provided them with unity. Is it clear? So, in stories, some essence of the culture of a community can be found. That is the point here. In the next quotation, linguistic standards, word choices, expressions and gestures are molded into a semantic system manipulated by politicians, religious leaders and corporate heads to create myths that serve to consolidate the power structure. So here the writer is borrowing from Roland Barthes. This is the idea from Roland Barthes. Okay, because I am presenting, so I cannot write.
Can you please spell it out? Please spell it out. Idea of?
Yeah, the idea of myth. It is the idea of Roland Barthes. R-O-L-A-N-D, Roland. R-O-L-A-N-D, Roland Barthes, B-A-R-T-H-E-S. He is a French writer, 20th century French writer, who suggested that myth is manipulated by politicians, religious leaders and corporate heads to consolidate the power structure. That is, it always helps people in believing in ideology. This system fosters the thoughtless consumption of products, faiths and laws that inhibit the free expression of ideas. Like advertisements, which perpetuate stereotypical ideas, patriarchal ideas, or racist ideas. Rolla explained how advertisements are a kind of modern myths, and they are used. Literature, film, television shows, these are all helpful, or these are all manipulated to perpetuate certain ideas of the dominant class on everybody. So the importance is that to break free from this system, as Benjamin pointed out, the wave of dictation is not seamless. By challenging and exploring the putative truths of the myth of freedom, we can make room for truthful and imaginative expression. Here is where genuine storytelling comes in. So Benjamin's idea, Walter Benjamin's idea of storytelling is that it is an imaginative expression, and therefore it can challenge the stereotypical ideology or ideological notions perpetuated by these different cultural products. So imaginative storytelling can challenge this. Benjamin maintains that the ability to exchange experience, what he calls Erfahrung, which means the moment in which one learns something about oneself and the world, is at the heart of genuine storytelling, and that ability, so exchange experience. So when one exchanges one's genuine experience with another, Benjamin calls it Erfahrung, then one learns something about oneself and the world. And this is possible through storytelling. Why? You remember Vargas Llosa's definition of storytelling, that it contains the essence of the culture of a community. And when you participate in this exchange through storytelling, then you learn something about yourself, about your community, about the world. And genuine storytelling provides this access to something genuine. But now this kind of storytelling has become almost impossible, which at one time seemed inalienable, has all but disappeared, because shared experiences are not the basis of story anymore. So we have stopped living tribal life, community life. We are forced to consume the cultural products created by the corporates, and therefore what kind of book we will read, what kind of stories children will read, what kind of literature, fiction we will consume, what kind of films we will watch, all these are not spontaneously created by the community, but they are created by corporates who wants to perpetuate the ideology of the dominant class. So Benjamin says that traditional storytelling has almost been eclipsed. Traditional forms of storytelling have been eclipsed, and shared experiences mediated by a wise storyteller has given way to individualized experiences that reflect the growing alienation in society. So in today's society we have alienation. Alienation from what? alienation from our community. Our bonds have been shattered. We live isolated lives. We live as individuals. We do not have a common myth. We do not have common stories which we can share any longer as a community. But we consume that which we are provided by the market and produced by the corporates. Alright, so both Vargas Llosa and Walter Benjamin emphasize the creative, genuine and authentic quality of storytelling, which through lies, fictions, common jokes and so on, provides authenticity to communal life of a person. So in this sense, storytelling is an antidote against alienation. And the last sentence is something that I have abstracted from the book. Children's literature does not exist per se, which I said at the beginning of this lecture. There is no such thing as literature only for children, because literature is also read by adults. It is an institution which is not made by and for children. It is a part of culture industry. And I told you that this idea of culture industry is developed by the Marxist writer Theodore Adorno. Alright, so we have more or less finished discussing the story, and now perhaps we can discuss questions, but I didn't have time to formulate the questions. I will write down the rest of the questions and send you by WhatsApp. So far I have written 2 questions. How does Mohassheta Devi mix fact with fiction in the story The Non-Veg Cow? And you don't have to write it now, because I will send you by WhatsApp. And the second, does the story The Non-Veg Cow represent social reality, or is it pure fantasy? So you see that in both these questions I have raised the issue of fact and fiction, or reality vis-a-vis fantasy. So I am stopping the presentations. Can I stop the presentation? So in both the questions I raised the issue of fantasy and reality, or fact and fiction. And this issue is associated with the issue of children's literature, or the idea of children's literature. That children's literature basically belongs to the realm of fantasy. Is there any reality or any credibility in children's literature? How should we judge this kind of a story? Should we judge the story The Non-Veg Cow as a realistic story? Should we apply the criteria of realism when reading this story? Or should we read this story as children's story and therefore, purely fictional? Now, in my discussion, I have already pointed out how even if through humor or humorously Mohassheta depicts the cow as being anti-British, the idea of anti-imperialist and anti-colonial notions are expressed through this depiction of a cow, who, even though is a cow, is against the British constable, and the exaggerated statement that there were many police cases against her. Those are exaggerations, humorous, but of course through those we can see the anti-imperialist idea of the author. And the stereotypical idea of children being gulled or made fool of by cock and bull stories. This idea is challenged when Mahashweta claims that this is not a cock and bull story, and readers are more or less compelled to accept the story that the cow goes all the way up to the terrace. So whether that is real or not, that is not the issue here. The issue is whether that is deception or not. It is not deception, because this very fantasy of a cow behaving in strange ways, expressing its freedom and its defiance of domesticity. It defies to be domestic. So our stereotypical notion that a cow is a domestic animal and therefore it silently obeys all commands, that very notion is shred into tatters. That very notion is totally rejected here. When it seems that the cow has a mind of her own, that it acts on her own, it even gets intoxicated by drinking dead palm juice and so on. In other words, it enjoys its life by teasing people, pushing people into the water and so on and so forth. It roams freely and so on. So it is an idea of freedom expressed through nonsense, because this is nonsense. A cow cannot climb up to the terrace. But this nonsense has within it the sense that the expression of defiance against domesticity can be seen here. I am laughing because I remember the humorous scene when the cow goes to the edge of the terrace and enjoys the view of the moon. So a cow cannot have an aesthetic sense, and she challenges the gentleman who wanted to enjoy the view of the moon. She challenges his rights. So the typical notion that a man can only have aesthetic sense and can enjoy the view of the moon is challenged when even a cow seems to enjoy it. So breaking of these stereotypes have been possible through the means of fiction or storytelling, and how telling lies in fiction, how it is important for a storyteller, that is clearly explained by Vargas Llosa and Walter Benjamin. It is these fictions which gives one a sense of authenticity, paradoxically. So if one is free to imagine this kind of freedom, this kind of authenticity of a community life through common stories, then that is an antidote against all kind of domination. So I think I have talked enough on this topic. Now I will stop unless you have any questions.